And here we are. Good morning, everyone. I hope everybody can hear me well, and I wish to welcome everybody, a warm welcome to all of those who joined us and who are in the process of joining us for today's event. Today's event is on strengthening synergy for a system-wide shift, anticipatory action in the nexus. My name is Dunja Dujanovic. I'm the early warning reaction team leader at FAO and your moderator for today. A quick introduction to the event. What we want to explore with you today is the concept of anticipatory action. Why is it increasingly important today, and how can we take it to scale through a better synergy between a range of different critical actors for a true system-wide shift in how we deal with crises. We will be shortly joined with opening remarks from Jagain Chapagain, Secretary General of the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, as well as Anya Nietzsche, Chief of the Partnerships and Resource Mobilization Branch of OCHA. Following their remarks, we will be hearing about 3 critical key partnership initiatives which are aiming to scale up anticipatory action. And following that, a panel discussion to explore some of the challenges and opportunities in working across humanitarian and development sectors to protect more people against shocks. You can interact with us in this event by using the questions and answers function in Zoom. Our team of experts following the event will reply to you in real time. And there will be a further opportunity to interact through an application called Padlet. We will explain how this works a little bit further on into the event. But before we proceed and welcome our first speakers, especially for those who are still familiarizing themselves with this topic, we wish to show you a brief introductory video on what is anticipatory action, who is the Anticipatory Action Task Force, and what are we advocating for. So the video, please. Thank you.
Extreme weather events are causing destruction more frequently and severely than ever before. Storms, floods, heat waves, diseases, and other types of hazards affect millions of people every year. Crises around the world are intersecting and compounding each other, increasing the risk of conflict, displacement, and hunger. The poorest and most vulnerable are hit hardest, adding to record levels of humanitarian needs in decades. By forecasting when hazards will strike, analyzing their risks, agreeing on actions, and enabling financing ahead of time, humanitarian organizations and communities can act before disasters hit. This way, anticipatory action saves lives and livelihoods and ultimately preserves people's self-sufficiency. It's a faster, more efficient, and more dignified way to protect people against predictable crisis. We want to shift the humanitarian system to be more proactive instead of reactive. But for anticipatory action to reach more people, cover more locations, address more types of hazards, and create lasting impacts in the lives of the most vulnerable, more can and must be done. But what will it take? First, when a crisis is imminent, every second counts. Because of that, we have to invest in early warning and readiness to anticipate, especially at the local level. Second, fast help also requires fast and pre-arranged funding. That is why we need to expand flexible, predictable, and coordinated financing. Third, different events in the world increase the risk of disasters. This reality calls for the application of anticipatory action to a wider range of hazards. Fourth, we must find the appropriate solutions for each challenge. This is only possible through exchange, collective learning, coordination, and partnerships all around the world. Fifth, for anticipatory action to become business as usual, it must become an integral part of national disaster management systems. These recommendations reflect our years of experience in more than 60 countries as the Anticipatory Action Task Force. We are formed by 5 organizations: IFRC, FAO, WFP, OCHA, and START network. Collectively, we have put our resources and expertise into anticipatory action to save lives and livelihoods. The Anticipatory Action Task Force promotes a wider reach of anticipatory action, provides technical support, helps build evidence, and strengthens synergies with global initiatives to support countries. Together, we are calling on communities, organizations, and governments to join us so more people can benefit from anticipatory action. Let's make humanitarian assistance faster, more efficient, and dignified by acting early on predictable crises.
And so with that, we are delighted to welcome Mr. Jagain Chapagain, Secretary General of IFRC, to deliver his opening remarks. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dunia, for the introduction and also for showing us that really very important video with a very important message. Thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here to open this event that we co-organized with the Anticipatory Action Task Force. As you saw, it includes IFRC, WFP, FAO, OCHA, and the START network, together with the UNFPA and the Anticipation Hub. As you saw in the title, I think the nexus is an important and useful concept for linking different sectors together. But it is also increasingly used because we recognize that there are divisive silos which must be addressed. Organizations and governments sometimes treat humanitarian, development, and climate as distinct issues or phases of an intervention. But if we put ourselves in the shoes of affected communities, the silos between humanitarian, development, and climate sectors are not relevant or helpful. What's important is that we are able to deliver on their needs, the need to stay alive and be protected, the need to anticipate, to have agency, be self-reliant and more resilient for any future shocks. How do we reconcile this difference in perspective of organizations on the one hand, which is very siloed, and the people, which is very integrated? For the IFRC, our Strategy 2030 provides a framework for our entire IFRC network to put the needs and aspirations of people at the center of everything we do. People and communities do not separate their needs and aspirations around the humanitarian, development, or climate silos. If our planning and actions recognize and respect this, nexus suddenly looks achievable. Through our actions, we are committed to contribute to the Grand Bargain commitments, Sustainable Development Goals, Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction, and the Paris Agreement, which together strengthens the nexus. We know that taking life-saving anticipated action before a shock based on forecast and risk analysis can reduce the impacts of a hazard and therefore reduces the humanitarian needs. At IFRC, anticipated action has become one of the main approaches to deliver our humanitarian mandate. Today, anticipated action is being developed by National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in about 30 countries. Forecasts have successfully triggered early action by communities in Peru, Togo, Uganda, Bangladesh, Mozambique, Ecuador, and in Mongolia since 2015. Through a wide range of actions from cash to provision of animal kits, anticipated actions have helped communities protect their lives and livelihoods. Despite the challenges posed by the COVID-19 crisis, national societies continue to implement anticipated action to reduce the impacts of extreme weather by acting early to protect themselves and their livelihoods. In addition to accessing funding from our own forecast-based action by the DREF, national societies are also supporting their government counterparts to develop early action plans that can be funded by their own budgets, such as in the case of the Philippines. Together with our partners, FAO, OCHA, WFP, and the START network, we are working collectively on anticipatory action in over 60 countries. While we celebrate these achievements, we need to rethink the nexus so that the anticipatory action can be brought to scale for effective localized humanitarian response. And here's why we need to do that. First, 1/3 of every 100,000 people is still not covered by early warnings in the world. Second, just 24 hours warning of a coming storm or a heat wave can cut the ensuing damage by at least 30%. However, early warning systems do not always reach at-risk people. When they do, the messages are not always easily understood and actionable. And three, we know 55% of crises are somewhat predictable. It's just only 1% of that funding is pre-allocated. That's why we have to work on the nexus to scale up. Addressing these issues require the humanitarian, development, and the climate communities to work together. The 5 key policy asks shown in the video can be used as the recipe for how to jointly meet our scale-up ambition. I'm very happy to see my friend Thomas, a true champion for anticipatory action from the German Federal Foreign Office, joining the panel with colleagues from Kenya Red Cross, START Network, and UNFPA. All your expertise and insights will be important for us to understand the challenges and opportunities faced by different sectors. Alexandra from the Anticipation Hub, Ben from the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, and Daniel representing the Crisis Lookout Coalition are here today to help us understand how the initiatives that they are leading can help break these silos and strengthen synergies to scale up anticipatory action. By anchoring our collective work on the needs and aspirations of communities at risk, I believe that we can and we must scale up anticipated action to provide assistance that is faster, more efficient, and more dignified, while also protecting the development gains. Nelson Mandela once said, after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Colleagues, while we have made huge progress, we still have many more hills to climb to fully realize the potential of anticipated action. And today, I invite all of you to join us in this effort. Thank you. Over to you, Dunya.
Thank you very much, Jagan, for your inspirational remarks and for reminding us, in fact, that from the perspective of affected communities, a lot of the divisions and the silos that we work in don't make a lot of sense, and that we must look from their perspective to scaling up this approach to protect them effectively against shocks. So thank you again for your intervention. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Anya Nietzsche, Chief of the Partnership and Resource Mobilization Branch of OCHA, for her opening remarks. Over to you, Anya. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dunya, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. This is really a great pleasure to be with you here today. Thank you also, Secretary General, for your opening remarks. The Red Cross and the Red Crescent family has been a pioneer for anticipatory action and for joining up humanitarian and development programming for a long time. And as the saying goes, we all stand on the shoulder of giants, you and your amazing colleagues in the national societies. Colleagues and friends, for those of you I have not had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Anya Nietzsche, as Dunya has already introduced, and I recently joined OCHA as the Chief of the Partnerships and Resource Mobilization Branch. I thank all of you for inviting me today to add some reflections at the outset of this very important discussion. In the video, it was said that anticipatory action should become business as usual. Also, we could say anticipatory action is a no-brainer. Thanks to the excellent work of many of you, we have more and more proof that anticipatory actions work, that they are, as said, they are faster, they're more efficient and more dignified than traditional approaches. By acting early, we do not only avert humanitarian need, but also allow people to protect their livelihoods And for the community as a whole, we contribute to safeguarding hard-won development gains. If we know a disaster is about to strike, it is our humanitarian duty to act to mitigate the suffering and negative consequences quickly, and in particular for those that are most vulnerable. Together with the Anticipatory Action Task Force, all the dear colleagues who are bringing us here together today, we at OCHA facilitate a collective anticipatory approach across the humanitarian system, and jointly with our partners, we bring resources to the table. As you know, last year, Mark Lowcock, the Emergency Relief Coordinator, announced an investment of up to $140 million from OCHA's Central Emergency Fund, the CERF, to help us scale up anticipatory action. Today, we are discussing how we can reduce vulnerability and subsequent needs by better joining up the ways in which humanitarian and development work together and interact. This, of course, is a broad and long disputed subject, but we believe that it is anticipatory action that offers a concrete way of doing this. And evidence so far has shown that anticipatory action delivers both clear humanitarian and development benefits. Let me give you a few examples. In Somalia last year, we reached people ahead of the full impact of the triple threat of locusts, floods, and COVID-19. And data generated so far show that the CERF investment, our Central Emergency Response Fund of around $15 million helped to significantly mitigate the adverse impact of these multiple shocks to more than 630,000 vulnerable people. This initial anticipatory investment by CERF also helped mobilize additional donor funding. So far, more than $180 million for these actions. All in all, collectively, these funds, together with early sustained large-scale humanitarian operations, reduced the number of people in crisis and emergency from an initially projected 2.1 million in October 2020 to 1.6 million 5 months later in January 21. This is a close to 25% reduction, so a remarkable achievement. Also, in Somalia, we learned that key disease outbreaks were reduced compared to similar experiences in the past, where we acted later. By upgrading boreholes much earlier, we improved household financing, boosted mental health, kept livestock healthier, reduced disputes related to water sources, and mitigated displacement. This type of investment is what we need development actors to take up at a much larger scale, so that together we can fortify people's livelihoods and coping capacities and avert humanitarian needs. Another example is Bangladesh, and Secretary General, you already referred to Bangladesh as well. Here, we have acted together ahead of some of the worst flooding the country has seen in decades, and we have reached some 220,000 people. That's more people reach faster and at half the cost compared to similar post-flood responses in the past. We also found that some 76% of women and girls who received early information and menstrual hygiene kits were more likely to access regular healthcare, continue school, generate income, or participate in social and community activities compared to non-recipients. So again, a major achievement. Throughout these pilots I just described, we applied also a rigorous approach to learning and evidence generation of what works and what doesn't. In Bangladesh, for instance, we interviewed more than 15,000 beneficiaries very quickly, and by doing so, set for future standards for increased accountability of humanitarian assistance. Our independent evaluation also found that recipients of anticipatory action in Bangladesh were more likely to evacuate families and livestock and lost fewer productive assets. Beneficiaries of cash transfers were less likely to borrow, and when they did, they borrowed at lower interest rates. The study observed higher child and adult food consumption and life satisfaction, and saw that beneficiaries recovered more quickly after the floods ceased. So again, really major achievements of something that, as we said, should become business as usual. These are just a few examples to demonstrate how even one-off anticipatory humanitarian assistance targeted at the most vulnerable can have an impact in the long run and thus provide more effective outcomes. So now, what prevents us from doing of what we know works? Of course, we still see a shortage in flexible, coordinated, and predictable financing for anticipatory action. That means the use of existing and new humanitarian funding in a flexible and anticipatory manner is still insufficient. This needs to be rectified. We also need to finance startup costs so as to build the capacity to establish anticipatory action frameworks to be ready when disaster strikes. We also need more investment in predictive analytics and early warning systems to make forecasts more usable for humanitarian action. This would also allow us to expand anticipatory actions to a broader range of shocks and hazards, something that is urgently needed. And apart from more financing, we need to continue our attitude of learning as we apply anticipatory action and keep ourselves to the highest standards in documenting evidence and transparency. This includes figuring out how innovative anticipatory action can help other important improvements in the humanitarian system, especially on cash, localization, and gender, and in line with the key theme of our meeting today, to ensure that we effectively link humanitarian and development efforts to provide faster, cheaper, and more dignified support to as many people in need as possible. And finally, we need to start the process of mainstreaming anticipatory approaches in our communities and support national authorities to include these approaches into their respective disaster management mechanisms and toolboxes. All of us in this virtual room today can play a part in supporting a scale-up of anticipatory action. As Mark Lowcock said a few years back, applying an anticipatory approach requires a degree of boldness, maybe bravery, to challenge the status quo. So let's be bold and brave and scale up anticipatory action to reap humanitarian and development benefits. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anya, for that really energizing speech. And we welcome you warmly to our group. And of course, look forward to further engaging, of course, with OCHA having a critically important role in scaling up collective anticipatory action and learning. Just to point out also the importance of the point you made on the humanitarian duty, the moral duty that we have of acting on evidence of shocks that we know will occur. So building on from your comments also on the importance of coordination and partnerships, I wish to introduce the next segment where we will hear about 3 critical key partnership initiatives, which are all seeking in their particular ways to work towards scaling up anticipatory action. We will hear about Anticipation Hub, represented by Alexandra Roy, head of the Anticipation Hub at the German Red Cross. We will hear about the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership, or the REAP, represented by Ben Webster, head of the REAP Secretariat, and the Crisis Outlook Coalition, represented by Daniel Clark, director of the Center for Disaster Protection. Before I hand the floor to our first speaker, Alexandra, allow me a moment to introduce you to our other possibility or opportunity for interacting with us through an application called Padlet. Here on the screen, you can see instructions on how to use this, and in the chat box, Lydia will share the link to this page. If you click on the link being shared in the chat, you will arrive at this landing page, and you will be able to insert your comments and thoughts or questions on these relevant topics to express your thoughts on how the partnerships that will be presented shortly can make a difference to enhance the work, a better synergy between the humanitarian and development sectors in protecting people against shocks. So we invite you all to visit the page and leave your comments and questions, and we will review some of these results towards the end of the event. So with that, I wish to proceed promptly to our first partnership initiative, the Anticipation Hub, and I hand the floor to Alexandra Roy. Alexandra, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dunja. And hello, everyone in the call. So imagine you are a practitioner, you're a scientist or a policymaker. And I really hope we have many of you in this event today, and you are eager to learn more about anticipatory action and exchange with others. Where would you go? And I really hope from today onwards you will go to visit the Anticipation Hub. The Anticipation Hub is a platform that facilitates knowledge exchange and evidence-based learning on anticipatory action. And Anja just mentioned, I'm very grateful for that increased learning is really one of the major points for successfully jointly scaling up anticipatory action. The Anticipation Hub is a joint initiative between the German Red Cross, IFRC, and the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center. And it brings together 73 partners across the Red Cross Red Crescent movement, universities, research institutes, NGOs, UN agencies, governments, donors, and network initiatives with funding support from the German Federal Foreign Office. At the Anticipation Hub, practitioners, policymakers, and scientists can first stimulate innovation, learning, and exchange through our working groups on emerging topics for anticipatory action. Let me just mention a few. There is a working group on Earth observation, one on conflict, one on disaster risk financing. So please reach out if you're interested in joining. And the objective of these working groups is to co-create new learning materials and interact through webinars, networking, mingles, blogs, and more. Secondly, we want to access guidance and support through a library of learning resources, global map of anticipatory action initiatives already available at the Anticipation Hub, a repository of early actions and training activities and tools. In addition, through collaboration with initiatives like REAP, the Crisis Lookout Coalition, and the Anticipatory Action Task Force, the Anticipation Hub will use the knowledge and evidence gained from practice to promote national, regional, and global policy and advocacy on anticipatory action. So building on that point, how can the Anticipation Hub support in scaling up anticipatory action and help bridge the nexus? Firstly, let's imagine you are working in a climate or development ministry or a hydromet agency, and you are increasingly hearing the term anticipatory action popping up from the humanitarian sector, but you want to learn more to see where are the possible synergies to capture across your investments in preparedness, in forecasting, and early warning system development. Or secondly, you could also be a project manager from a local NGO who is interested to see the variety of guidelines or manuals that are available to develop forecast-based financing. Where do you go? And I really hope that from today onwards, you will go to the Anticipation Hub. The knowledge, experience, and tools captured in the Anticipation Hub are the result of years of experience on implementing anticipatory action in the humanitarian sector. But now it's the time to elevate this experience that we gathered so that it can be utilized and strengthened by climate and development actors across the nexus. For example, we look forward to seeing the Argentina National Met Service, who recently became a partner of the Anticipation Hub, share their experience co-designing impact-based forecasting with humanitarian actors as a core tool to develop anticipatory action. We are keen to tell the story about how local government units in the Philippines are adopting the early action protocols of the Philippines Red Cross to allocate governmental budget for early action. Through providing a platform, the Hub will encourage and inspire actors across sectors to learn from their peers and jointly identify solutions. Grounded in our collective experience and expertise, the Anticipation Hub will strive to be the go-to platform for everyone ready to break down the silos and strengthen synergies across sectors for our collective ambition to scale up anticipatory action and protect the most at risk from predictable crisis. As Chagan mentioned today in his opening words, anticipatory action is about people. Now it's my turn to ask you, are you up for that challenge? And with that question, I would like to hand over to Ben Webster to tell us more about the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership. Over to you.
Thanks, Alexandra, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to be back at HNPW, albeit virtually, but thanks to the organisers for the invitation to participate. So, as already been mentioned today, fantastic progress in recent years in terms of utilising the improved forecasting capabilities and risk analysis and forecasting capabilities, particularly from the humanitarian sector. So members of the Anticipatory Action Task Force have been making great strides with support from Germany and others, really leading the way to ensure that humanitarian actors can take action in advance of hazard striking, therefore mitigating the impact of those hazards. And in 2019, a group of convening countries, 15 countries, came together under the UN Climate Action Summit, along with 23 convening partners, including all of those involved in the Anticipatory Action Task Force, to try and answer the question, well, now that we have proof of concept, now that we know these approaches work and do provide more dignified, cost-efficient ways of responding and mitigating the impact of hazards, how can we really take these to scale? And therefore, the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership was launched at UNCAS by those convening partners precisely to try and create this systemic shift. How can we move from the pilot projects and programs that have been delivered and that have created this proof of concept? How can we move to ensuring that these are the default way of responding rather than the exception? And therefore, the Risk-Informed Early Action Partnership aims to bring together the humanitarian community where all of this progress has been made, but along with the climate community, the development community, and across governments, civil society, international organizations, and also the private sector. So the partnership provides the ambition and the vision and has 4 major targets that we are aiming to achieve, which will hopefully help to catalyze this systemic shift. So the aim of the partnership is to make 1 billion people safer from disaster by 2025. And there are 4 main targets underneath that. So target 1 is around ensuring 50 countries have reviewed and integrated their laws, policies and plans when it comes to climate change adaptation and disaster risk management, ensuring that early and anticipatory approaches are embedded, but that those advances and improvements and benefits can be realized across timescales as well. So the improvements we're making for acute emergencies and better management of risk can also be used in the longer term. Secondly, we want to link finance, instruments and delivery mechanisms with effective early action plans on the ground, and to have 1 billion people covered by that. Thirdly, we want to mobilize $500 million by 2025, investing in early warning systems, the infrastructure and technology, but that links to what's traditionally known as the last mile community. But we want to swap that around so that this is actually the first mile community. Communities on the sharp end of climate-related hazards receive assistance, and the entire system and infrastructure is designed around their needs. Finally, we have a target to ensure that 1 billion people are covered by improved early warning systems linked to effective risk communication, with a particular focus on heat waves, given they will be increasingly prevalent in the years to come. So the partnership provides this platform to bring together diverse stakeholders across these different communities, and we really want to see this systemic shift. We complement the Anticipation Hub because they are focused on practitioners, particularly in the humanitarian community. Alexandra talked about elevating that to bring in more diverse stakeholders, across these communities. And that's precisely the platform that the partnership aims to provide, so that we can see 1 billion people covered in the years to come. We also link with the financing community, and that's where we've worked closely with the Centre for Disaster Protection and the recently launched Crisis Lookout Coalition. Financing is obviously a key component of this whole value chain between early warning, early action, and how we can support it. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Daniel Clark, who's the Director of the Centre for Disaster Protection. Daniel, over to you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Clark. I'm Director for the Centre for Disaster Protection, and I am here to introduce you to the Crisis Lookout Coalition and our campaign for a G7 agreement this year on crisis risk finance at the meeting in June in Cornwall in the United Kingdom. If we want our children to live in a world free of crises, we need a world that deals with tomorrow's crisis risks, not today's crises, not just today's crises. And if we want that, we will need both humanitarian and development funding to work even harder than it is doing today. If we keep our eyes closed to future threats, we will continue walking blindly into crises again and again. We must open our eyes and look out for threats, and we must use this information to plan ahead, and we must walk together. We must walk forward together, leaving no one behind. So that's why the Crisis Lookout Coalition is asking the G7 to agree to 3 things this year. First, the creation of a crisis lookout function to act as the international system's eyes, scanning for risks, helping to prioritize threats that, if not addressed, would require a response at the level of the international system, from pandemics to famines and everything in between. From the perspective of anticipatory humanitarian action, the crisis lookout function would help us to think about where there should be early action protocols being set up, which communities, which risks should be prioritized. We believe it is possible to establish this in a way that makes it impartial, transparent, inclusive, and free from blind spots. Second, we are asking for the G7 to shift to make pre-arranged finance, including anticipatory action, the primary way to pay for crises by 2030, so that funding gets where it is needed faster, with greater impact, and in a more dignified way. Our research shows that just 2% of international funding used to deal with COVID was in place before the pandemic hit. It's possible to increase this 2%, to grow and improve this part of the international system, obviously including anticipatory humanitarian action, to the point that pre-arranged financing becomes the default, not the exception. Making all funding decisions during a disaster is too late. If it can be arranged in advance, it should be. Third, we are asking the G7 to renew their commitment to leave no one behind on crisis risks by supporting an initial group of Pathfinder countries to develop better prediction of and coordinated protection from crises. Our research shows that the countries where poverty is now expected to increase the most as a result of COVID have received the least from the international system. Without concerted action to correct this, these communities will continue to be left behind in the drive to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm delighted to stand with over 50 leaders from the development, humanitarian, and finance communities with local and global perspectives to make these 3 asks together as part of the Crisis Lookout Coalition. Last week, the Centre for Disaster Protection, which leads the coalition, launched our G7 solutions paper, setting out in more detail how these 3 asks of G7 leaders could be implemented in practice. Our paper is not, nor could it be, the final word in how we should solve these problems. Our hope is the paper starts a conversation, not ends one. You can read our solutions paper and watch our campaign video on our website or by visiting the Crisis Lookout Coalition website. I'll share the links in the link that was discussed earlier. We've produced a statement of support for leaders within our system that want to show their organisation's commitments to our 3 high-level asks. And I'm delighted that many of the organisations that are represented on today's panel have signed up to these 3 asks. Please let me know if your organisation wishes to sign on. The deadline is this Friday. COVID has been the biggest global moment of disruption and loss of life since the Second World War. 1 in 33 people on the planet is now in need of humanitarian aid. The G7 must learn the right lessons. They must acknowledge and act on these 3 asks. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much to Daniel, Ben, and Alexandra for presenting these critical partnership opportunities and initiatives. Definitely to look out for some relevant commitments at the upcoming G7 summit in June and later on in the year in November at the COP both hosted by the UK this year. So quick reminder, following what we have heard about these partnership initiatives, that we really would like to hear your thoughts and opinions. Therefore, please use the Padlet function to share those with us, and the link will be shared again with you in the chat. So please, a reminder to collect your thoughts on what you have heard so far. So in terms of introducing our panel discussion, I would like to reconnect it a little bit to what we heard so far about the Crisis Outlook Coalition, REAP, and Anticipation Hub. These are all initiatives that are trying to achieve the same goal, a systematic scale-up of anticipatory action, also in a way in which it creates synergies to work across the development and humanitarian sectors. Because only through collective actions we can meaningfully reduce risk, protect people from shocks, and protect development gains. What we are trying to achieve collectively is curb the rise in humanitarian needs, rather than continuing to endlessly scale up, which is unsustainable. So from this perspective, it is my pleasure to introduce our panel discussion. We have an excellent group of speakers today who will be sharing their own particular perspectives on how anticipatory action can effectively deliver the humanitarian development nexus and bring a wide range of stakeholders together, highlighting some of the opportunities as well as challenges in doing so. We're quite sorry to say that one of our panelists announced for today, Mr. Samuel Gama, Mitigation Officer with the government of Malawi, won't be joining us, unfortunately, due to an urgent commitment that he was called into. But you will find him at the subsequent session on anticipatory action taking place at 1 p.m. The mingle session. We will introduce this at the end of the event. So with that, I would move swiftly forward with our first question to our first panelist, Ms. Halima Sado Abdullahi, Head of Research and Learning with International Center for Humanitarian Affairs at the Kenya Red Cross. So Halima, welcome. Nice to see you again in one of our virtual events, always a pleasure. And the question we have for you today is, what learning have you gathered from implementing forecast-based financing that can inform the planning of initiatives like the ones that we heard about previously? And how can these initiatives in turn support your work? Thank you, over to you.
Thank you, Dunya. Maybe I'll start by echoing the sentiments from Mr. Jagan on this particular journey that we've had has been climbing one hill after the other. And for me, I think I look at it from a learning experience instead of saying challenges. Most of the things that we thought were a challenge actually has been a learning experience. So at the Kenya Red Cross Society, we've been developing 2 systems concurrently. That is a focus-based system for droughts and floods. And we are actually anchoring this particular system on the early action protocol template developed by the IFRC. So the journey started towards the end of 2018. And for sure, a number of things that we've learned along the way cannot be shared with this short time, but I'll try to share as much as possible. Sometimes I feel like we can write a book about it or maybe a thesis. It has been a journey of where we've actually realized that we can't do it alone as a national society. To be able actually to develop these particular systems. And I'll give a quick example. During the system development for both the drought and floods, we came to realize that there is no particular one shop that you can go and buy the ingredients for this particular system. So you can't say, I'll go to FAO and get everything that I need, or I'll go to the Met department and get everything that I need. And most importantly, to note that even if you go to, for example, KMD and get the focus they have, it is not in the format or the style or the shape that is needed to develop this particular system. So on this particular point is that what we thought was most importantly is actually to establish a technical working group at the national level where we have representatives from all key organizations, including governments and non-government institutions, development partners, the organization behind the financing of anticipatory action. So we established a technical working group that meet once a month for us to be able to co-develop this particular system. And the thing that what has come out clearly in terms of this particular technical working group is because we are developing the system together, it is easy for the different organizations to actually adopt the system, institutionalize the system, to ensure that the system is sustainable, considering that the particular systems we are developing, whether we are calling it early warning, early action system, we are calling it anticipatory system, or focus-based financing system, it's a living system. It's not a system that once developed, that is it. Now we can continuously using it to take early action or to take anticipatory action. The more the forecast skill is improving, the more we're getting to get important missing data, including the historical risk data, then the system will continuously be improved as we continue encouraging and advocating for anticipatory action. So this particular point of having a technical working group where we are all coming together to be able to co-develop the system has been very useful for us. The other thing that has been very useful for us is developing partnership and agreements with institutions that are holding the data that we need. For example, historical risk data cannot be found in one institution. So developing those agreements, becoming friends sometimes has really helped us to actually be able to get this particular data, but more importantly, to work with these organizations that are holding this data to interpret it to fit into a format that is useful for developing the anticipatory system. Another thing we've realized is the development of the early action protocol in our context is a long journey. Initially, we had allocated 1 year for system development for both drought and floods. I can tell you until now, we are still developing the system. Our flood early action protocol was submitted last year for validation, but it came back with some areas to be addressed, which we are currently working on. So now another key lesson there is 1 year is not enough to actually develop, especially if you're developing a countrywide system for a particular hazard. The other thing is, how do you keep the technical working group engaged? How do you incentivize them? For us, we meet once a month, so that once a month keeps going. We try to incorporate this particular system to the ongoing initiative within this institution so that there's no duplication of efforts. So you'll find FAO is interested, for example, in a drought early action system or anticipatory system or WFP. So we are working together with this institution, including the National Disaster Management Authority, so that whatever we are developing can be incorporated into their existing structures and systems. So that has also been very useful to us. But more importantly, when we are actually preparing to present some of the works to the validation, to the technical working group on the monthly meeting, I can tell you, Juna, it's like we are preparing for a PhD thesis defense. The works, the reading of the paper, so that we can actually present a methodology and an approach that is acceptable for all. Because we don't want to develop a system where it has not been endorsed by the key stakeholders, by the mandated institution. So the input that has gone in, it actually be a key learning experience for us. So we take this work very seriously, and we are bold, as had been indicated by the previous speaker, but you have to come back to a technical working group, which is also as a partner in developing, but also like a jury. They'll always query you, but why did you think this method is okay? How come you haven't looked at this particular data that FAO is holding? What about this work that WFP is doing? What about this work that the START network is doing? So that has been a very key learning lesson for us. We even have to do dry runs before we go to the technical working groups to be able actually to present what we need to take there. The other important thing I had said is about leveraging on existing systems and initiatives. We are not starting from a scratch. Remember, the anticipatory action is coming to fill a certain gap within the disaster risk management cycle. So we can't say it's a one bullet for all. So we really have to identify where we fit and try to adjust into the existing initiative and system.
Thank you, Halima. I'm so sorry to have to interrupt you just to be able to get our other panelists in. Thank you very much. And we will come back to you shortly for some of your concluding remarks. So I hope we can hear your thoughts in that occasion too. So I would like to progress to our next panelist, welcoming Mr. Amjad Ahmad, the Disaster Risk Finance Coordinator of the START Network in Pakistan. Amjad, we would like to ask you, from your experience of implementing anticipatory action, what challenges and opportunities do partnerships bring for creating more impact on the ground for those at risk. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dunya, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to answer such an important question. First of all, I would like to introduce that the project I am implementing in Pakistan, that the DRF project, is a project which is a project of 22 organizations, a consortium led by START Network. And in that project, we've got 4 pillars. First of all is the hazard prediction model itself, then flexible and readily accessible finances, and we carry out planning for anticipatory actions with the local organizations, and then a governance system. So this whole project revolves around these 4 pillars. And whatever I would be sharing with all the people who are listening to me is straight from my experience of working on the ground, directly working with the people, organization, and affected communities and the response organizations. So first of all, I would like to congratulate you on a very inspiring video with which we start. And just to set the pitch of what I'm going to talk for next 3 to 4 minutes is that yes, we are in fact very bent upon a reactive response. We are probably do it as a knee-jerk reaction. Perhaps we are all so tuned into it. All the humanitarian and development organizations are so much into it from last so many years that we cannot extend our imagination beyond the reactive response. But anticipatory response is a bit different. We have to think a bit different in this case. First of all, we have to anticipate what are the needs, and then we have to anticipate what would happen. So working on these 2 lines, what biggest challenge I found out was that people are, the organizations are, the communities are really not ready to accept the anticipatory response. Like the first question is, if something hasn't happened, why to start preparing for it or why to respond to it? So the first challenge, which brings us to the opportunity as well, is to change this reactive mindset of the people, to change this reactive mindset of not just the humanitarian and development organizations, but to change the mindset of the communities as well, to change the mindset of the specialized response government agencies as well. And this changing of mindset is a challenge, and it is also a very great opportunity in itself. And then coming over to a very important point about the anticipatory response is that we always have a very, very limited window available to us, a very short time space in which we can cater to the needs of the people or those who are about to be affected by the disaster. So in this perspective, the readily availability of flexible funding mechanism, which START Network has already put on ground, and in DRF project, which I'm looking after, we give the funds away in the matter of hours, not days. Like it's maximum like 72 hours, the funding reaches the ground. So what I want to highlight here is that we have to understand that the accessibility to flexible and readily accessible financing is very critical. And this whole humanitarian community has to understand that doing a disaster need assessment or damage need assessment and then submitting the proposal and waiting for the funds to arrive, those people who have already been suffered through the crisis, they already suffer a lot because of this delay. And anticipatory action has to revolve around readily available finances. Where there's a particular problem, like in the part of the world, Pakistan, I am working in, is the accessibility to the affected community itself. The everyday shrinking humanitarian space in which the local organization, the NGOs can work because of, you can say, sort of mistrust or misunderstanding between the government and the development organization, that has to overcome with a coordination mechanism which has to put in place right before any sort of emergency or disaster could strike. And this brings us with an opportunity of establishing an in-country hub in Pakistan with the help of START Network, which we are working on, and we have progressed a lot on that. That in-country hub of all the local organization, which is very intimately and closely linked with the government, so that in case of any anticipatory response, no special permission is required, and the funds could readily flow in from the START Global Financing Facility, SFF, and the anticipatory response could be conducted successfully in the short window of time. At the very same time, I would also say that working with the other actors like the government and the UN agencies is very important. And we at START Network, we are working very closely with UNOCHA Regional Office and humanitarian country team at Pakistan level to bring in anticipatory actions right within the humanitarian planning at the country level. So in the end, I would conclude by saying that disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction is a continuous system. It's a big system which has to go on all the time. And anticipatory action is just a small part of it, but changing the reactive mindset of the people and the aid organizations, building capacities of the communities, working with the communities, introducing new form of readily accessible and flexible funding mechanism, developing partnership with all the stakeholders, this small piece of work can make really huge difference. Thank you, Dunya.
Thank you very much, Amjad, for your really valuable perspectives from Pakistan. And we will come back to you also for some conclusions at the end of the event. I would like to proceed with our next panelist and our next question, Mr. Thomas Zanaisen, Director of Humanitarian Assistance at the German Federal Foreign Office. The question we have for you today, Thomas, is what has changed in recent years across the donor landscape that is helping us to scale up partnership and also create the synergies needed for scaled up participatory action across humanitarian, climate and development sectors. So the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dunya. Yeah, what has changed? First of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm always very happy to participate in meetings on anticipatory financing or anticipatory action, because I find it every time amazing what has changed over a short period of time, and I find it really, really inspiring. And let's not forget, we've been in this for less than 10 years. And if I look back, 8 years ago, no, 6 years ago, actually, we started as Germany our first forecast-based financing models together with the International Federation of the Red Cross, Red Crescent, German Red Cross, Bangladesh Red Crescent, and WFP. And only 4 years ago, we proposed in the ODSG that we may wish to consider anticipatory financing within the SURF funding streams. And I remember how we looked, how my colleagues from other member states looked at me with amazement and surprise what I was talking about. And there was only one head nodding very much, and that was the Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock. And now we're already in year 2. And Anya mentioned it, where we have a substantial anticipatory funding stream within the SURF. I think it's almost 20%. I think the same applies to DREF and START, and we take these things almost for granted by now. And it is only very recently. So I think what has changed, yes, a lot. The drivers have not necessarily been the donors. I think it is one of the cases where it is a huge collective outcome that we take anticipatory action now as irreversible and an integral part of humanitarian action. But the drivers have been elsewhere. I think, first of all, there have been the drivers in the system. The 5 that are actually constituting the task force I would have mentioned, but by now there are many more who really take this from success to success, frankly speaking. And but even more important, I think, and that is a big difference from other issues that we're dealing with, is local ownership. I think there's very little I've seen in my 4 years as a humanitarian director where there's so much input coming from local and national level. National ownership, I think, is very, very strong. And ultimately, this is the driving element. We heard a couple of examples today from Halima, from Jagan, and Mijan from Pakistan. There are many other examples out there, Philippines, Mongolia, you name it. So the donors, yes, we've been part of it, but not necessarily the driving force. And the questions that have been asked to us, now I speak collectively for donors, are we able to break the silos? From Jagan or Alexander's question, are we already brave enough? what Ben is asking us about the 1 billion people covered. Well, yes, I think we're moving that way. But to use Jagan's image, I would rename it. I said it to you, Jagan, yesterday. I wouldn't talk from mountain to mountain. I would rather use Star Trek and say we move from galaxy to galaxy. But we approaching new galaxies where we have not even explored the recent galaxies. So I think if, as donors, I think we have to deepen our understanding what is required. And these are very much the 5 tasks from the 5 priority regions that you have named in task force, mainly to improve existing models, scaling them up financially with a predictable funding stream, solidifying what we know, mainstreaming it, and then move to new predictive models. And I think that requires from us donors quite a lot of internal discussion. I think Daniel said it rightly, Ben as well. I think in the core humanitarian part, we are a little bit more advanced than the other issues linking it with climate change, development, and nexus. But we need to do that. And as a donor, we try to refocus the discussion all the time in these kind of venues where we're happy to participate, which are very useful. Of course, we tried it in the European as EU presidency. I think we last year we have a rather broad consensus now in the European Union. What is at stake in this field? And we must increasingly use fora which exceed the humanitarian system, properly speaking. So one is G7, and Daniel, thank you very much for presenting it. This is exactly the questions we need to explore. And the British presidency is doing an excellent job on that matter. And when we take over, we'll continue on that path once we take the chair of the G7. COP is the second one, which is absolutely crucial because there we have all the actors from a government. There we can really talk beyond silos because it's an intergovernmental approach, but also across ministries approach in the respective donor countries. So I think this is the way to go, and we will definitely do that together with others, especially the United Kingdom. And finally, and I end that, I think we have a very healthy and breathing structure now established amongst us to shape our understanding as donors and help us. And I think these are all the platforms that have just presented their case. And I think we really have to work through them because I can see in my own country when we go into REAP, into the others, the Outlook, that we can really see that several ministries work together and we sharpen our understanding in order to have a collective approach which exceeds the humanitarian, includes the climate and development. So again, we are not yet there as donors, but I think we have been a supporting role, supporting others who are driving. Over.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And it was in fact very interesting to hear a bit the historical perspective, reminding ourselves it's a fairly young initiative, but still so fast growing, and some very encouraging signals to work across the different sectors and bring in more partners also from the development and climate side, which we all hope to collectively do. So with that, I swiftly progress to our 4th panelist, Ms. Aiko Narita. Welcome to you today, the Deputy Representative of UNFPA Bangladesh, who was, of course, one of the key partners in last year's Bangladesh flood anticipatory action intervention. Aiko, our question to you is, what role can UNFPA play in supporting partnership initiatives to unleash the full potential of anticipatory action from a nexus perspective and achieve some of the policy asks that were outlined earlier in this event? So with that, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dunya. And really thank you for organizers who are listed in this banner of this session and the whole event for inviting me to this really important talk. An event, particularly this session about building partnerships, linking the humanitarian development nexus via this anticipatory action framework, really important point. If I may be so bold to be able to paraphrase the Secretary General of IFRC, what was said earlier is that indeed, things aren't any longer black and white in this humanitarian and development world in settings, let's say. And I think that's a really important reality check for us to begin with when we talk about anticipatory action framework. And of course, UNFPA is in the business of particularly focusing around women and vulnerable girls, adolescent girls. So for us, the Anticipatory Action Framework became a really important experience in being able to help the most vulnerable indeed in Bangladesh. And UNFPA as a whole is in some ways embracing this entire concept of anticipatory actions, to the extent that corporately, the humanitarian team in headquarters has really put a huge energy into it, that it's in our corporate strategic plan, the new one that's coming up. But back to Bangladesh. In 2020, UNFPA Bangladesh, with our sister UN agencies, FAO and WFP, participated in this pilot conducted by OCHA on the anticipatory action. And what I can say from the Bangladesh experience that the policy asks I want to talk about are really around the policy ask of number 2 and number 5. So the policy ask number 2 really is about, the importance of, investing in early warnings. And I think the government of Bangladesh, through this anticipatory action, realized the importance of investing in that science of early warning, and the United Nations as a whole is committed to supporting the government, mainly the NDMO, which is the Natural Disaster Management Office, to do that. And this was very clear during our recent ERC's virtual visit to Bangladesh, when the government officer, made a comment. We really need the United Nations to help us to provide technical assistance around early warning. But on the same token of the science, I think we have to talk about local engagement, the community side, the softer side, and that's equally important. And especially when we talk about investing in communities, I'm talking about behavioral change communication. Of course, as a UN official, I can go on and on blabbering the UN jargon around it, which most people don't understand. So what I'm going to do is to share with you 2 vignettes of a case, that we were able to encounter. For example, Sumi, who is 17-year-old in Jamalpur. She was a beneficiary to our menstrual health kit that included sanitary napkins, along with information about sanitary health, as well as child marriage prevention. And when the volunteers were explaining, this is where the BCC, behavior change communication, happens, they came across that Sumi's family was on the verge of actually marrying her off as a child marriage, as a child bride, because of poverty, which is a very common scene in Bangladesh. And the volunteers got involved and was able to convince the parents that that's probably not the best way forward for this young lady who may have a really good future. And so, not only was able to really benefit from sanitary napkins, but really eventuated into preventing child marriage, for that matter. And another one is of, Mohammed Shayed, who's 28, coming from Kurigram. I know I have 10 seconds here, but from Garihara, totally remote area. And you wouldn't believe the remoteness of this area. He's third gender, you see? He's transgender. And he has never gone to school. But having been receiving this dignity kit of hygiene health issues, he felt very counted in this and was able to understand better about disaster, what to do, what not to do, where he can get help. So I think, in terms of local engagement, we're really talking about not just how to weather the storm, quite literally, but what is that rippling effect that this has as an anticipatory action, I think is a really powerful tool. Now, just very quickly on the 5th key policy ask, which is about mainstreaming anticipatory action into national disaster management system. The UN plays a really critical role convening these development and humanitarian government entities that don't often talk to each other. And so with NDMO, we are trying to advocate AAF, the anticipatory action, and making sure that it's gender mainstreamed. But with ministry like social welfare, we're also advocating that shock responsive policies like AAF is integrated into their development policy, and we're trying to convene them. Actually, that's nothing new, to be really honest with you. But I think what is powerful is that the United Nations is writing that down in our new UN Development Sustainable Cooperation Framework. Now, that's an accountability framework. So it's not just a verbal commitment and nice to do things, but that convening is actually being put into an accountability framework of the United Nations as we go forward. And there would be then the budget next to it. So I think that's saying something about how we fully unleash the potential of AAF. Thanks a lot, and over back to you, Dunya.
Thank you very much, Aiko. And of course, we're very excited about the increasing role of UNFPA in this space. Very inspiring to hear you speak to that and to give us, of course, some very powerful beneficiary perspectives from the affected populations. I think this is one of the priorities that we're trying to address as the Anticipatory Action Task Force, to really put the affected population at the center of planning of our interventions on the ground. So thank you very much for your points. And at this point, so before wrapping up the event and hearing sort of our last parting messages from all of our excellent speakers today, I would like to just summarize a little bit what we have heard from the audience. The audience in the background has been engaging with us through both the questions and answers function, but as well as through something called Padlet, which is an application where people have been able to leave their comments and questions and points. And so I would just like to read out some of the key inputs that we have been receiving from the audience as the event proceeded. And you can see here some of the feedback that we received. So the overall question was, how can these partnerships, such as the REAP, such as the Crisis Outlook Coalition and the Anticipatory Hub, make a difference in terms of really meaningfully scaling up anticipatory action to protect vulnerable people against shocks? So there was a lot of feedback around these partnerships enabling to create an attitude of learning and culture of anticipatory action. I think this was mentioned by several of our panelists today, how important behavioral change is and how important it is to change the mindset from a reactive to an anticipatory modality. There was points on the expanding the evidence base for anticipatory action to demonstrate the benefits, or to demonstrate how effective is it and why to act ahead of shock, something that again was highlighted throughout the event. And Anya Nietzsche also spoke about the importance of this and the accent that OCHA is putting on collective learning. We had feedback that it is very important to promote a targeted and coordinated approach to financing, preparedness, and capacity strengthening. So the coordination of the different financing modalities is incredibly important for anticipatory action, because obviously this financing can come from different streams. The humanitarian stream is only one of them. The development stream, the climate stream, the insurance stream. So there are different mechanisms that should be coordinated to be most effective and allow us to protect more and more significant numbers of people against shocks. Also strengthening the standardization of trigger mechanisms across organizations and sectors, something that we as the Anticipatory Action Task Force are very keen on working on the ground. This is what we try and promote. Like Halima mentioned, the technical working groups in many of the countries where we work serve exactly this purpose, to evaluate the risk analysis tools that we have and try to agree on the triggers for specific disaster events so that we can share amongst us the same evidence for acting early. We had also feedback about strengthening cross-sectoral relationships and local level and building local ownership of anticipatory action. Again, as we were mentioning also with Aiko just earlier, really putting the affected populations at the center and working with them to build their capacity as the sort of the first line response to crises, and ensuring that they can use early warning tools and understand that information and take part in the design of anticipatory actions that are for them. So with that, I think that we can proceed to collect a few final remarks, possibly also building on what I just mentioned, which is the feedback from our audience. Really very quick remarks so that we can possibly also keep to the timing and not go too much over time. So Halima, I would hand to you first, if you would like to give us your conclusions. And again, apologies for interrupting you earlier in the panel. Over to you, thank you.
No problem, Dunya. I think for me, I have one final remark. And I think the final remark is about the focused information. I think it's important for us in the anticipatory community to actually understand that focused information is key pillar in the process. And we need to work with the mandated institution, but most importantly, we need to actually find ways of capacity building and capacity strengthening this institution so that they're able to give us the kind of focus we really need to have a proper system in terms of anticipatory work. So with regards to urgency, as we keep talking about upscaling, it is very important for us to think around the scale of focus and how we can enhance these capacities. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Halima. Amjad, over to you for your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dunya. I would say that we have to really recognize that after the early warning has received, the window of opportunity, the window to react, and the window to response in the case of anticipatory action is so short that early action planning, and that too with the inclusion of the communities, with the consent of the communities, where the voices of the communities are heard, are really important, because those are the plans and those are the needs and those are the solutions which would really make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amjad. Thomas, handing over to you now for your concluding remarks.
Very quickly, thank you first of all for this great discussion. I mean, it confirms my impression, and the comments from the audience was similar. I think we have a very healthy environment for progress. I think this is a really bottom-up driven process. I think we have to enlarge the discussion at the top, G7, COP, and other things that we get out of the humanitarian silo. And we have an excellent transmission through the platforms that have been presented, their case today. And the feedback loops that particularly Danny has explained for the G7, this is exactly what we need for behavioral change in governments. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for that. And indeed, some really super important opportunities this year for scaling up anticipatory action. Aiko, back over to you, please, for your concluding remarks and any final thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks, Dunya. I think, I mean, it goes without saying that we really do need to make sure that the field level, you know, the least, you know, the most left behind are really part of this process. And I think you have mentioned before about the learning. And when we talk about the importance of learning, I think Anya mentioned this at the beginning, that the learning also happens with these people in mind. And I think that sort of integration is truly important. And I really, this is more of my hope, I think, is that this momentum will be kept so that we can continue to make this the norm rather than exception. So thanks a lot, and over back to Dunya.
Thank you very much, Aiko, for your thoughts. Over to Alexandra for your concluding remarks. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dunya. I would just mention one point. I think we were successful the last years because there was really a very, very strong sense of collaboration and of really open and honest discussions. And I would just like to mention that the Anticipation Hub has an event page. So please have a look. There are dialogue platforms on anticipatory action happening as well this year. Unfortunately, still mostly virtual, but like 26th, 27th of April, the Southern Africa platform is approaching, and there are many more. So in Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the global one end of this year. So please join the community to learn and to improve. We all have to share very openly our results and our learnings. Over to you, Dunya. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for joining us today and telling us about the Anticipation Hub. So, Daniel, over to you, please.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. So it's been wonderful again to listen to you all today. My final comment is very brief. I think this year is a big year. I'd encourage you to look at and engage with the Crisis Lookout Coalition and our asks to the G7, and think about how those specific asks, which have been designed to really include both development and humanitarian actors, the voices of, how those could potentially feed into the asks that this community makes in the months and years ahead.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And finally, Ben from REAP, and thank you so much for presenting REAP today. Over to you.
Thanks, Dunya, and thank you all for a fantastic session. I guess coming back to the title of the session around the nexus, and having been aware of that debate going on for many years now, what I like about this particular issue and agenda is that it's a much more practical way, moving away from philosophical debates to a practical issue where we can plan together, coordinate together, and integrate humanitarian development, climate issues around, you know, a practical issue to prepare for. So from our perspective as a partnership, we have three main priorities. One is around driving this momentum around global commitments and shifts in policy and practice. And Thomas has mentioned big opportunities on the horizon this year, which we'll try to help capitalize upon. Secondly is around putting countries in the driving seat. So we've heard a lot about people-centered approaches and ensuring that there's local ownership and leadership. And we will aim as a partnership to try and make sure countries and governments are really in the driving seat. And lastly, you know, this event has highlighted that we have to work together and coordinate and collaborate. And we will aim to try and connect the gaps and the demands with the resources and the capacities so that we can start to become greater than the sum of our parts. We can work together effectively to realize the systemic change. But thanks, Dunya. Back over to you.
So thank you so much, Ben, and thanks so much to all our excellent panelists and speakers today. It's been a really tremendously useful and interesting event, even for us who have been for quite some time working on this theme. And it's really always nice to see how much we're progressing from being a very small sort of pilot idea back in the day to sort of really a growing community applying this approach across new sectors, new ways, involving new partnerships. And now with these three partnerships presented today, really amplifying the message even more. And with this year particularly critical because of the G7, because of the COP, to really make some substantial progress forward and insisting on this accountability issue, which we believe very important. So to really make it a responsibility to act ahead of shocks. So thank you very much, all of you today. And I thank also the audience for joining us. I hope this was an informative event for you all. Before we conclude, I have been asked to promote our next anticipatory action event at 1 p.m. So in just a little over half an hour, which is called the Mingle session. This is basically recreating what we do habitually in the anticipatory action community, which in pre-COVID times would see us meet a fair number of times per year to interact and share ideas, share some good vibes, build some friendships and relationships and ideas for working together on the ground. So please join this event, a great opportunity to meet some practitioners and exchange ideas, also exchanging what inspired you from this event today. So with that, thank you very much again, and hope to see you soon. There will be most likely an anticipatory action event upcoming at the next ECOSOC in June. So stay tuned also on the Anticipation Hub for upcoming events in this area of work. Thank you very much, and have a lovely day. Bye.